So what do you do?
I'm Steve Waldo. I work for the Vermont Department of Liquor Control. I've been an educator with that department for about 10 years now. Before that, I was a field investigator for about 25 years.
How do you get this job?
That was kind of a strange little story. I actually used to be the police chief up in Ludlow, Vermont. And I know a police chief sounds like a really cool job to have, but it actually is pretty terrible. Nobody ever comes into your office saying they're having a wonderful day and just wanted to pop by and say everybody's doing a great job. So when I was visited by two liquor investigators, who I happen to know, but I just didn't work with them a lot, when they came into my office, they said, well, how'd you like the job? And I said, absolutely. And they said, well, wouldn't you like to know what it is first? And I said, what are you talking about? They said, we actually have a job. I said, doing what? And they said, being a liquor investigator. And I said, great, what the heck do they do? And they said, well, they do bar checks. And I said, what's a bar check? They said, well, you have to go into bars. I said, oh, and when you see a drunk, you arrest them? And they said, no, you write a report and mail it to Montpelier. I said, that's it? And they said, yeah, that's pretty much, oh, yeah, if you see an underage person in there, you're supposed to arrest them. I said, well, I've done that many times, so that's not a big deal. Oh, and yeah, you do have to work undercover. And I said, ooh, that sounds like a lot of fun. So yes, I've got a lot of stories of times when I've dressed up as somebody who I'm not. I didn't try to pretend I was a female, but dressed up as somebody who I'm not, and was in a bar actually down here in Bennington. I've done several cases down here over the years. But I also had to do some pretty not so much fun stuff, which was fatal accident investigation with underage people. When they got drunk, they would have crashes, and then I'd have to go do an investigation and talk to their parents, help the police pull the bodies out of the car, and all that sort of stuff. So it's a very wide-ranging job, and we do work throughout the entire state.
How do you enforce the laws of possession of alcohol and tobacco to minors?
Me personally or the department?
Both.
Both? Okay. Back when I was a field investigator, now I do nothing but education. We're dedicated specifically to training bartenders and cashiers. We go into high schools and talk to teenagers about making good choices. I work at community coalitions, testify in the legislature, do all kinds of stuff. But before I had the job as an educator, when I was a field investigator, we'd actually get called to underage drinking parties. And we were one of the team of several, and I mean a team as in state police, sheriff's departments, local cops, game wardens, all kinds of different people. And we'd actually go to homes or gravel pits and find underage people and arrest them. And when we arrest them, it sounds like we're incarcerating and throwing them in jail, but that's actually not true. Most of the time we call the parents. When I say most of the time, it's because some of the time they're so drunk we have to take them to the hospital. We're just trying to prevent people from making really tragic decisions. That's what we're trying to do.
Has there been any major change since you first started?
Wow, first started. That was a long, long time ago. Yes, there's been a lot of change. I actually grew up in Vermont, so I can remember vividly what it was like to go to high school in Vermont. And one of the things that was acceptable, oddly enough, it was just kind of a given, that one member of your class was going to die before everybody graduated. We used to have this thing called the empty chair. During graduation, it's typical in most schools that the graduating seniors are usually on the stage, and then the parents and the family are all in the audience. And it was absolutely normal to find one or more empty chairs on the stage beside all the graduating seniors that represented the person that died during their last 4 years or so. Some as young as freshmen, but a lot of them in the senior year. And we also have to keep in mind the drinking age was 18 back then. So New York being 18 right nearby, Vermont was 21 when I was in high school, but it was changed in 1972 to 18. There were a lot of teenagers that it wasn't that hard to get alcohol because if the drinking age is 18, the person that's old enough to buy is right sitting with you in math class or in English class, or in homeroom. So it wasn't that hard to get alcohol, and because of that, there were a lot of teen deaths. And when I go into high schools now and I talk about the empty chair, usually I'm met with, what the heck is that? Nobody's ever heard of it, which to me is a huge resounding success. when we still have teen deaths, but we don't have them at the same level we used to, that's a success for me. I mean, things were crazy. Back in the 1980s, it was completely acceptable for police officers to find an underage drinking party that they knew where it was going to be and deliver messages to their kids, not their kids, but the kids that were at the party, from kids' parents. That was pre-cell phone. So how did you get a message to your underage son or daughter who's at the party? Well, you call the police and say, would you please deliver the message not to be out too late? We got to go to grandma's tomorrow. And officers actually would go to young people and say, now, this is, you're so-and-so, right? Yeah, I just got a message from your mom. Don't be out too late. And by the way, please don't drink and drive, okay? You're gonna be safe. Yes, I am. And this teen would be meeting this officer with a can of beer in their hand, and they're like 16 years old. So that was acceptable in a lot of areas in the state. And we finally realized in 1998 that that was no longer the way things needed to be, because we actually killed more teens in the state by population base than any other state in the nation. So something had to be done, and what that had to be is we needed to start enforcing the drinking law. We didn't have to change the law was there, but just officers really weren't taking it seriously. So then we did a lot of enforcement, 1999 and 2000, 2001, as a matter of fact. When I say a lot of enforcement, we were arresting on average about 6,000 kids a year in this state, so that's a lot. But we changed the norm, so it was no longer acceptable to have a huge drinking party in a gravel pit. And the reason they had them in gravel pits is the parties were so large you couldn't have them in the house. Some of these parties were 500 and 600 kids with live bands. Then you had charged admission to get in. I mean, how crazy is that? So then it got to, well, let's have the party in my home while my parents are gone, and you're gonna need a search warrant. Well, that whole thing about a search warrant, that's on TV. Search warrants are not that hard to get, and usually we don't even need a search warrant. I'll give you, for instance, we got dispatched by the state police, and one night we got a call that there was a drunken teen on the center line, staggering around in his underwear with a can of beer in his hand, drunk. And we said, oh my God, somebody's going to get hit. He's going to get killed. So we went screaming out there. We get to this young man, and I meet him in the middle of the road, and he is so drunk he can barely stand up. And I said, hey, and he says, what? And I said, where's the party? He said, well, let me show you. And he took me right into the house. So of course his friend's in there saying, what are you doing, inviting a cop in? And I said, well, he invited me. And they said, don't you need a warrant? I said, no, I was invited. He guided me right into the home. So a lot of cases we really don't need warrants. But when we do need a warrant, it's not that hard to get. So by having parties in homes, the parties actually got smaller. So typically a party in the 1990s would be, a small party would be 200, 300 teens. Now the average size parties are 30 and 40 kids. So are the parties still going on? Yes. At the level that they were before? Not at all. So things for underage drinking have actually improved, which for me is great, because when you talk to a teenager about, do you know anybody personally in your class who has had adverse effects from alcohol, I do hear stories, but not at the level I used to. So things really are improving.
Has there been any major change in tobacco since you started?
Oh, absolutely. I'll never forget, we've always, well, let me back up a little bit. When I first came into law enforcement, there's always been a prohibition against young people smoking. Always has been. Except the law was there, but most officers, when you said, so at what age do you need to arrest, bust, ticket, whatever you want to call it, an underage person for tobacco, the officers would say, I'm not sure where to find that law. I'm not even sure what the age is. Well, it was 17. Just nobody knew it. And one of the things Liquor Control does is we do tobacco enforcement too. So quite a number of years ago, the legislature thought, this is kind of important. I think we need to enforce this. And we need to make the law very visible. And so they changed it to 18 and said to the officers, you need to go out and arrest people for that. So arrest at that time and still is not a physical arrest. We don't put handcuffs on when we catch a kid with a pack of cigarettes. But we do issue them a ticket. Now, just to give you an idea how long ago that was changed, the fine's $25, and it's never been changed. So that law for $25, when it was first put in, was a long time ago, and back then, $25 was a lot of money. Now it's not a real big deal, it's like 3 packs of cigarettes. So, that was one of the things we hope to have revisited at some point, is make the penalty a little more commensurate with what they're doing wrong, rather than this ridiculous fine. But, yeah, we actually went out and enforced the law, and I'll never forget one officer in Windsor telling me how he was dealing with enforcing the anti-smoking law with teens out in front of the schools. The teens used to just stand in front of the school before school started, and in big groups just sit out there and smoke. So he, being, you know, an officer, he would drive over with his cruiser. Well, as soon as they saw the police cruiser coming down the road, everybody would scatter. So he said, I gotta find a different way. So he actually figured out he could ride his bicycle. And so he took his bicycle to the school, and of course it took the kids a long time to figure out what that was all about. But he arrested a young man, way underage, like 15 years old, smoking. So he gives the kid the ticket, and the kid says, I don't understand why you're ticketing me. I got these from my mom. So the officer said, really? Are you serious? And he said, yes, I got them from my mom. He said, well, let's find out if this is true or not. So he called the police officer called dispatch, had a police cruiser stop by, put the young man in the police cruiser. The cop went with him. They went back to this young man's house and said, Mrs. So-and-so, well, your son said that you gave him a pack of cigarettes. She said, yeah, I let him smoke. And the officer said, great, and I'll issue you a ticket for furnishing to a minor. So it was kind of funny because parents thought it was kind of okay, and then they quickly learned it's not okay. And as a result of us enforcing smoking underage laws, and we also enforce the laws against stores selling to minors, what we found is the smoking rates have come down significantly.
So is it true that kids actually get alcohol from stores?
Not as much as they used to. To give you an idea of what I'm talking about, back about 20 years or so ago, it was thought that probably teens were buying alcohol at stores. Now, Liquor Control has always issued liquor licenses since 1934 to stores to sell alcohol or tobacco to people that are of legal age. And because of our enforcement efforts, we assumed that stores were doing a great job. You know, we do inspections, we pop in, we sit across the street, we try to monitor the sales. And yeah, we caught a sale here and a sale there, but it really wasn't something that happened all the time. So we assumed from what our personal experiences were that stores really didn't sell to underage people. Well, we were dealing with teenager after teenager who was saying, no, that's actually where I got it. I just went into the store and they just sold it to me. Well, didn't they check your ID? No, they didn't check my ID at all. They just, you know, I walk into there, grab it out of the cooler, walk up, and there it goes. So there seemed to be a disparity between what we were being told by the teens and what we were experiencing personally. Well, we kind of got forced into this, and it came down to us actually as a start with tobacco. We didn't do alcohol right away. We did tobacco because there was quite a push in the 1990s to do something about underage tobacco smoking. So one of the thoughts was cut it off at the source. If it makes it harder for teens to get tobacco, maybe they won't smoke as much. I'll never forget getting a phone call from our office in Montpelier saying you need to do a compliance check. And I said, great, what the heck is that? And they said, well, go find a teenager. I said, go find a teenager? And they said, yeah, go find a teenager somewhere, preferably 15, 16 years old, and give them some money and send them into a store. Let's see if they sell tobacco or not. And I said, are you kidding me? This is going to be a total waste of time. And they said, no, well, we should just do it. If nobody sells to the kid, fine. So I happened to be working with a group of teens in Springfield, and I said, would anybody be interested? Oh my God, yes, we'd love to do this. This would be so much fun. So I had 2 young people. They were both, I believe, I remember they were either 15 or 16, but they were right in that age bracket, 15 and 16. And I said, now guys, we're not going to go anywhere in Springfield because you know everybody here, and we don't want to muddy the waters with buying from somebody you actually know. And they said, okay, that'd be good, because I don't want to have to face people and make them think I'm a cop or something. I said, okay. So we did some outlying towns. And I'll never forget going, what I would do was park in front of a store or off to the side and the young people would go in, and then they'd come out, and usually they come out with money in their hands because I gave them money, and they come back with money. Refusal, that would be good. Well, that wasn't what happened. Actually, there was like 17 out of 18 stores did sell to our kids. I was shocked. I said, my God, what the heck is going on out here? This is terrible. Well, I called Montpelier and I said, it's something wrong with my area. I said, everybody is selling to our kids. I don't know what's going on. Nobody's carding them even. They're just selling to them. And so they said, well, that's not happening just in your area. Everybody's having exactly the same problem. And I said, oh my word. Evidently, stores do sell to our kids. So clearly it wasn't a one-time deal. It was something we had to continue to do on a regular basis, was send young people in. And eventually the stores got the plan because they would get a huge fine, like a $100 fine, first offense. And we realized that it needed to be expanded statewide. We needed to have a randomized picking of where we're going to go from one month to the next. And it's been going on now since the mid-1990s. We've been doing tobacco. It actually has resulted in almost just a negligible amount of stores selling to minors now. It's actually pretty rare to send a young person in and have the cashier sell to the minor. The road that we took to get to this point, it was bumpy at best. We caught cashiers entering their own date of birth into cash registers because the boss would say, that's it, we're not gonna sell to kids. I'm gonna make you, because the register, when you scan in a pack of cigarettes, actually prompts you with the date of birth. You have to enter the person's date of birth, so that means the cashier's asking for an ID. Well, we caught young people actually entering their own date of birth in, who were 20 years old or something. We caught cashiers doing some crazy things. We found cashiers that couldn't understand English at all. I mean, as in they couldn't read and write at all. So when you ask them the card, they look at this card thing, and they say it's just a bunch of squiggles. I don't know how to interpret that as a date of birth. I had one young lady that sold to our minor, and I said, but it says on the ID card that you looked at if the person was born before this date, then they're old enough. And she said, I don't understand that whole concept of before and after. So I was dumbfounded. I told the owner, I said, I don't know what to tell you. And she said, I don't either. She said, I'm having an awful time trying to hire a competent cashier. So it was a growing process over the years. And now we have very competent cashiers that can do math, that do card, they know what to look for. And the smoking rates have come down with teens for lots of reasons, one of them being stores. You just can't walk into a store and get a pack of cigarettes anymore. Now, that went on when we first started doing tobacco. That went on for 3 or 4 years, and actually is mandated by something called the Sinar Law. It's a federal law, and all states have to do compliance checks. All states have to make at least 80% compliance in their town, or I mean in their state rather. But alcohol never was mandated. The liquor board itself said, I think we need to do the same thing with alcohol. Well, you never guess what people like myself said. All this is ridiculous. We're gonna be a big waste of time. They may have sold tobacco to kids before, but they're never gonna sell alcohol to kids. Well, our first out-of-the-box experience was, yeah, stores were selling to kids. So we had to ramp up our enforcement, do a lot of more compliance checks. And one of the store owners one time said to me, he said, and it was a very valid question, he said, so you do compliance checks with bars too? He said, well, no, we're just doing stores. And he said, is that fair? No, actually it's not fair. Why shouldn't they be checked? So I'll never forget asking this one young lady, she couldn't have been barely 5 feet tall, maybe 80 pounds soaking wet. And I said, would you help me out? And she said, oh, I'd love to. And so the very first place she went into was a fairly nice restaurant that had a bar inside. And she could barely get up in the little bar stool, so she gets up onto the stool and she whispers over to me, and she said, because we had to go in with them to make sure, you know, that everything was on the up and up and nobody was lying or falsely representing themselves. So anyway, I'm sitting on the bar stool beside her. We're up in Middlebury. And she whispers to me, she said, this is ridiculous. Nobody's going to sell to me. And I said, well, great. If they don't, they don't. That'll be great, won't it? And she said, well, okay, but I don't think they are. the nice young man behind the bar came over and he says to her, he said, "What can I help you with?" And she says, "Can I get a bud?" And he said, "Absolutely. How do you want that in a glass?" And she said, "Okay." And then she looked over at me and she said, "Oh my God, he's gonna sell to me." And I said, "That's why we're doing this." So that was her first introduction. And since then, we've had many interesting experiences doing compliance checks. And we continue to do those with bars, hotels, restaurants, stores, everything. What that's done is it's forced the number of stores that sell to minor number down so far that right now, when you look at how teens, and when we ask teens themselves, this isn't from our compliance checks, when you ask teens, how do you get your alcohol, it's rarely from a store. And if they say, yes, it's from a store, and you ask them the next question, which is there a particular person that you get it from at a particular store? They'll say, yeah, it's when my friend, because we allow 16-year-olds to sell alcohol in stores. It's from my friend who works the second shift at the store. We wait till the manager is in the back or making a night deposit, and then I come in, and they're not so stupid as to steal the beer. They actually make the sale, because that way it doesn't show up as an imbalance in the inventory. So, as I said, we've done a great job on the not buying from a store problem. What we've also done, though, is pushed it into not the teens saying, well, forget it, I'm not gonna buy alcohol, is push them into, how do I find another method of obtaining my alcohol? And what we're finding now is it's the third party, so-called third party. Third party is an adult, and I do presentations and whatnot in Burlington and Rutland, and what we're finding in those communities is teenagers are actually using homeless people as a resource. Homeless people are already resourced. They're always under the bridge or over beside that particular tree every single day. They're easy to find, and if you give them a little extra money so they can buy a bottle for them, then absolutely, they'll buy as much alcohol as you want, or whatever kind you want. So, and of course, my conversations with teens are, you do realize these are people in need, that they have their own issues around alcohol, and all you're doing is making it worse for them. And of course, teens go, I don't know about that, I just know that I can get alcohol through them every single time. So now we have this other person sale. As an enforcement officer, that's not an easy problem to deal with, because as a store, that was easy. It's bricks and mortar, they're there. I can sit outside the store and watch it. I can send a teenager in that's underage and attempt to purchase. We can deal with that. What we can't deal with is, okay, where are those teens? How are they, where's this homeless person they're using? That's a harder thing to deal with. And it's made harder still, and Vermont has a very special law. Almost no state has this law. We were going to use something called the shoulder tap. And it's an enforcement technique, and what you do basically is take someone like yourself and position you outside of a store, and as adults come in, you say, hey, could you go in and buy me some beer? Now, most adults, as you can imagine, would say, I don't think so, you're way underage. But some say, oh really, what kind do you want? And to us, that's that you're gonna be purchasing through this adult from this store, and that's not the store's fault. And the store's doing their job inside. But we need to deal with that adult that's buying for the underage person. So in a lot of states, California for one, they're very successful. Texas is another, they're very successful in the shoulder tap. Unfortunately, our legislature in Vermont saw that as a little heavy-handed enforcement and passed a special law that said liquor control cannot participate in shoulder taps. Now, how this all came to fruition was some very enterprising law enforcement folks down here in Bennington said, let's give it a trial. Let's give it, just take a little sample and try this at a couple of stores and see if it'll work. And some legislators heard about it, that we were going to be doing this with the Sheriff's Department, the county prosecutor, and liquor control, and quickly passed the law. They happened to be in session at the time. Quickly passed a law that says you will not do that unless you get special written permission from us first. So we couldn't do that. We cannot have young people stand in front of stores and bust adults. Well, the reason the legislature was so adamant about this, it's not what you would think. is so adamant about this is the studies that they've done in California and Texas found most of the adults that were volunteering to buy for the underage people were folks that were either, there were warrants out for their arrest, they were already on parole, they're bad actors in the first place. And when I come in as the law enforcement guy to swoop down and arrest this person that's furnishing alcohol to you as my undercover person, we're gonna have to take them into custody, because these aren't just furnishing cases, these are now, oh my God, there's a warrant for this person's arrest. Well, what that does in those states, California and Texas, is it starts to flood the correctional system. You start putting a lot of people in jail, and Vermont doesn't have that many rooms, or that many beds for all those correctional prisoners, so it was said, don't do that, don't enforce that.
Parents still host parties for their kids, and is that illegal?
Great question. Does it still go on? Yes, but lots less than it used to. I can think back 20 years ago, where parents used to have what they call them safe parties. Now, that's a complete misnomer. There's no such thing as a safe underage drinking party. Plus, it's illegal. But parents, what they would do, I'll never forget going to one of these functions. We heard of a house party frequented by some kids. I think it might have been a graduation party even. But anyway, we get there, the officers and I get there, and we met with the parents. And the parents said, oh, no, everything's safe. And I go, what do you mean safe? Well, we took their shoes and we took their car keys. And we said, really? You've never heard of somebody having a spare set of keys? And they said, well, they wouldn't do that. And I said, you've never heard of people driving barefoot? I said, I've arrested people drunk that were driving almost naked. I said, teenagers, when you're drunk, will do anything. So we had to deal with the parents, and of course, what I mean deal with the parents is, there's a law, the old law said you couldn't furnish or purchase alcohol for a minor. Quite a number of years ago, it was added to now say enabling, which enabling is a term that a lot of people are like, well, what the heck does that mean? That means providing a place for teens to drink. So that applies to definitely the parents who are providing alcohol directly to their teens. But it also says it deals with a parent who is gone for the night. In other words, say your parents are out of town for the weekend, you call your friends and say, hey, my mom and dad are going to be gone until Sunday, why don't we have a party on Saturday night? Oh geez, that just brought to mind a really funny story of one that happened years ago in Springfield, where we found an underage drinking party. And the way we found it is, I got a phone call from the high school principal. He said, hey, there's going to be a party at so-and-so's house Friday night. And I said, how do you know that? And he said, I found a note tacked to my door. And I said, you what? Well, what we found was this girl had decided to throw a party on a Friday night while her parents were gone. And she'd made up these wonderful invitations. And she handed them out to all her friends at school. Well, one of those invitations ended up on the locker room floor, and one of her so-called, or what she thought was a good friend, found this, and she didn't get one. She wasn't invited. She said, oh, so if I'm not invited, nobody's going to be invited. So she went over and tacked it on the principal's door, and that's how we found out about the party. So we used to do a lot of proactive, we still do this too, proactive stuff when there was a lot of this going on. And of course, when we made these arrests, we'd make sure we put press releases out so everybody knew this was not acceptable behavior. We would arrest the parents and the teenager. And the fines for that are pretty astounding. It's $500 to $2,000 and up to 2 years in jail or both for each underage drinker at the party. So at one party that I dealt with in Springfield, the police got a call of a lot of breaking glass at the next door. And the police arrived and said, oh my word, the party was so out of control, they had broken every window in the house. So we said, wonderful. So I got called, went over, helped them process all the underage drinkers there. Talked to the young lady that their parents were gone for the weekend, and I said, well, I'm gonna have to call your mom, and she said, oh, good Lord, okay, I suppose. So what that means is I have her in custody at the police station. Mom is going to have to come in and sign for her daughter, like a piece of property, which is kind of demeaning, to say my mom has to sign for me. Yeah, they actually have to sign for you. And the lady when she came into the police station, I brought her into where her daughter was, and she walked right past me and just sucker punched her daughter right in the face, laid her right out on the police station floor. I said, oh my God, and I reached down and grabbed Mom and arrested her for assault, because that's not legal to do. And I looked at the young lady and I said, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I'm fine. And I said, you want me to call the ambulance? She said, no, I'm okay, but that's not my mom. I said, oh my God, some stranger? And she said, no, that looks and sounds like Mom, but I don't know who this crazy lady is, but my mom would never hit me, especially like that. She said, that person has lost their mind, whoever she is. So it was her mom. And I said, so I found out what had happened is her mom had come into town and had been told on the phone, you need to come sign for your daughter. Why? Because there was a party at the house. So her mom stopped at the house just to see what the house looked like. And here it was February, all the windows were smashed out of the house. So that means the pipes are gonna freeze, gonna cause some damage. She looked in the window and all the furniture was broken too. So the house was trashed. She came to the police station, and when she came to the station, I met her at the front door. And I said, Mom, Mrs. So-and-so, before you go in and see your daughter, I need to take some information for the arrest report. And she said, you didn't get that information from my daughter? I said, no, this isn't on her, this is on you. And she said, what do you mean on me? You're arresting me? And I said, yeah, until you turn 18, everything you do can be also the fault of you as well. I'm going to criminal court? And I said, yes. I said, the fine is enabling, $500 to $2,000, up to 2 years in jail or both. And by the way, there were 35 teenagers there drinking underage, so you're gonna be cited for 35 counts of this. Mom just snapped, she lost it.